Greetings once again from the bowels of Lunder Library. I hope everything's going well out there in English 108 land. So just wanted to kind of catch up and talk about where we're headed and highlight some of the things that I hope you're picking up on or will pick up on in week number 8. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for your generous and thoughtful feedback on what you've learned and things that I could do to improve the course. It's always really helpful for me to hear those things and to really kind of see what you're picking up in the course and what you'd like to learn. I do use that to guide the final 8 weeks or so of the course. So thanks again for that. It's always really helpful to read those. As we turn our attention and start to solely focus on the instructions assignment, I can't stress the importance of this particular unit. As I've talked about previously, and as you'll hear me probably say in future weeks, workplaces are governed by procedures, and procedures are the way that we maintain a level of efficiency, a level of consistency, and safety within the workplace. So this is a very important assignment for those reasons. And we know that good instructions are not just about getting from point A to point B, but doing so in the safest, most efficient, and most consistent way possible. And so what we have to do is we have to develop a methodology for doing that. And so, when we talk about the problems that we have with instructions, they're pretty easy to characterize. It can be stuff like, we don't have the right materials or the right stuff. We're not in the right place or the right environment to do something as safely and as well as we can. We don't have the right human resources, so something might take an extra set of hands. We're not the right person for the task, so we haven't identified the right level of expertise. We don't have the right safety equipment. Steps are omitted or knowledge is assumed that's not there. So to use a culinary example, you might read a set of instructions or a recipe and it tells you to make a roux and you have no idea what a roux is or where to begin. So the language might be a barrier. The directions themselves may be formatted in a very unintelligible, unuseful, cumbersome way that makes it difficult to go from the task that you're working on back to the instructions. You may not be alerted to the potential of an error or a mistake that you make, and you do it and you ruin the process. So there's all sorts of different ways that we can characterize the problems that we have with instructions. And so what we really need is some way to overcome those. And so that's what I hope to share or to forecast a little bit in this particular video. And so for me, it really comes down to 3 core moves or 3 core things that we do or think about while we write instructions. And we'll kind of take those individually. And the handout that I've given you really talks about these at pretty good length, but this should give you some sense of exactly what I'm looking for. And those 3 moves are staging, coaching, and alerting. And so when we talk about staging, what we're really talking about is putting the right person in the right place with the right stuff. And so we need to feel comfortable checking off each of those. And so that's really the beginning of any instructional document, and that's really what lists the physical materials, the intellectual materials, the human resources, the environment, and any background information or knowledge the reader would need in order to begin that procedure. And the gold standard here is specificity. So we want to be as specific as possible. So when we reference a specific tool or piece of equipment, we want to be specific. We want to provide sizes, we want to provide types. So it's not just about having a ratchet and a socket set. Maybe you need an extension. It's not about just having a particular type of material, but it's having a specific brand. If we know that that brand is better or more functional or fits that purpose better. So the more specific we can be, and the way I like to think about it is if we're talking about a trades task, are we providing enough information where somebody could go into a hardware store or into a building supply store and pick up exactly what they need? They could go right to the shelf. Or if we're talking about something else, maybe a hobby, could they go into another store and pick up what they need? The best example I know of, just because I happen to have a lot of culinary students in my face-to-face class, and so I'll use this as an illustrative example, is when we talk about recipes and food. I can tell you to that the recipe is going to require milk, right? Well, that seems pretty straightforward enough, but if we start to think about it, there's different types of milk. And so if I had to go into the grocery store and pick up milk, I would have some decisions to make in terms of fat content. Could I replace it maybe with some non-dairy substitute? Same thing with flour. Another thing that seems pretty self-explanatory, all different types of flour. And sometimes we know that different brands work better than others or yield better results. So what I'm getting at is that when we set the stage and we start to talk about materials and tools, we have certain insights, because we're the experts, that we can lend to our reader to help them make the task more consistent, more efficient, more reliable, and more safe. So when we're setting the stage, what we're really looking at are equipment, tools, environment. Environment's really important. Sometimes we need to have a certain amount of lighting. Sometimes we need to be on a certain type of surface. Sometimes we need a certain level of ventilation. So think really carefully about environment. It's one of those things that we take for granted, but a lot of procedures frankly happen more efficiently, more effectively, more consistently, and more and safer if we do them in a particular environment. So think carefully about that. Time frame. So we don't think of it often, but time is a resource, and we need to know what we're getting into. I've begun procedures before thinking I had plenty of time to complete it, only to find out that it takes way longer than I expected, and then I have to step away from it or sometimes interrupt it or sometimes completely start over. So that's an important thing to consider when we're setting the stage. And these are all things that I want you to list at the beginning of your document in a reader-friendly way. So think about formatting here. Can somebody quickly see what they're doing, how long it's going to take, what they need to do it, and where they need to do it? And so staging is really about that. And your handout sort of provides a little bit more granular detail about that. But staging is really the sum total of putting the right person in the right place with the right stuff. So we need to feel really comfortable about that. The other thing that's important to list in staging oftentimes are any pervasive hazards or safety equipment that somebody might need. So, it's a good place if you're going to be dealing with electricity and there's the risk of shock. You want to make sure that you include that. If you're going to be dealing with open flames, you want to include that because that's something that's, sort of persistent throughout the procedure. The next move, so staging, you got it. Coaching, and I use the word coaching very intentionally because we often think of the step-by-step instructions as just directing, but directing is pretty limiting, and directing doesn't imply any level of expertise or any insight. What I want you to do is assume the role of a coach, and you're coaching that person through that procedure, and so coaching really is the sum total of all the things that we do to guide the person through the individual steps. And so there's a lot of things that we have to consider here, and this is something that we'll spend some time thinking about. But it's really, are you explaining the individual steps that comprise this entire procedure? Are you explaining it in the most user-friendly way possible? So that's really all of the decisions that we make in terms of formatting. So how do we break up those steps? So we really want to have one action per step. We want to put things in the most bite-sized way possible. It comes down to the formatting of the document in terms of, is it easy to refer back and forth? We have to think, again, about our audience and about their actual use of the document. And oftentimes, most of the time, readers who are engaging with a procedural document have the task environment over here and then the reading environment over here. And what we have to do is make sure that the reader can go back and forth between the two really easily. So what we don't want to have is a 32-item list all in size 12 Times New Roman font that's impenetrable. So what we might want to do is break that up with headings so that somebody can easily access various points in the document. We also have to think about our use of images, which is something we're going to talk about this week. So, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but sometimes in an instructional document it's worth a lot more than that because it's so much easier to show the spatial relationships between things or a mechanism with an image. And so we have to think carefully about when we can put a well-placed and timely image in there so that a reader can see exactly what we're trying to do. Coaching also involves helping people overcome obstacles. So, every procedure has places where things get a little bit dicey or a little bit difficult. So we have to think carefully about the insight that we can provide to help the reader overcome that. And that's where your expertise becomes very valuable. We have to think about being precise. So it's not about using terms that are open for interpretation, usually adverbs like slowly. Those things are open for, what does slowly mean? We also have to use precise measurements. So units of measure are really important. So coaching is really the way I want you to think about this because it helps us embody what a really good set of instructions does. It's not just do this, but it's about doing it, again, in the most logical, user-friendly way possible. So that's really what coaching is all about. And then the final component of a really good set of instructions are the alerts. And alerts are our way of keeping people safe and helping them avoid any problems. And so that's really what I want you to think about when you're crafting your instructions are. One of the places when I need to have my reader pump the brakes and pay close attention because they're either at risk of spoiling the process or they're at risk of physical harm. And so there's only two things you really have to think about when it comes to alerts. One, it has to be timely. You have to provide that alert before the reader has any chance of making that mistake or harming themselves. So it has to happen at the earliest possible moment. And then they have to be conspicuous, so they have to stand out. So if I ask you what a hazard or a warning looks like, you're probably going to say things like big, bold, red, stop sign, skull and crossbones. Use all of those because you want your reader to see that there is danger imminent. And again, I don't just mean danger in terms of physical harm. I also mean danger in terms of you're about to do something that's going to be costly or inefficient or that is generally going to hinder the process. So those are really the three core moves: staging, coaching, and alerting. And I can tell you that the sample set of instructions that you're going to read has deficiencies in every single one of those areas. It violates one of those rules that's outlined on your handout. So, and there's at least a dozen things wrong with the set of instructions, which is pretty remarkable considering the fact that they were written probably by a professional technical writer. And I wasn't there. I didn't see how these particular instructions were developed. But this product, presumably the makers of it want the reader or the consumer to have a really good experience with it the first time they use it. They want the reader to use it and make the best damn cup of coffee they've ever had. And my thesis would be, and my claim to you would be, that there are barriers to that. There are barriers to a positive, consistent outcome. And I think there's a lot of room in there for reader error. And we want to eliminate that. And staging, coaching, and alerting are a way to do that. One thing I didn't mention about coaching that I think is important to note is that a lot of times really good instructions give you persistent and helpful indicators of success. So they tell you when you've been successful. And a lot of times they use sensory details to share that with you. It should look like this. You should hear this. It should smell like this. It should feel like this. So you should know when you're being successful so that you know that you can move on to the next step. So that's something that's really important, and that is something that I find myself providing as feedback to a lot of people's instructions is, hey, you could provide an indicator of success here. This is a place where you could say, hey, this is what it's supposed to look like right now, or this is what it's supposed to taste like right now, or whatever. So that's really what staging, coaching, and alerting is all about. And I can promise you, if you think intentionally about those three things before you begin writing any type of procedure or set of instructions, you will definitely produce better instructions than the average person, because that is really the whole picture of instructions. And we'll get into the minutia of it, and we'll start talking a little bit about language, and we'll talk about how to incorporate images, and we'll talk about those types of things. But really, if you just remember staging, coaching, and alerting, you're going to be very well off when it comes to guiding somebody through any particular process. So I look forward to seeing what you folks are coming up with. I look forward to reading your final drafts of the technical review. And I just want to thank you very much. You guys have been so diligent in completing your work, and that makes my job so much easier in an online class. I don't have to pump the brakes. I don't have to stop and let people catch up. We can continue to sort of keep the ball rolling, which is great, because what that also allows me to do is front load the course. So what we know about the average academic semester is that it kind of goes like this, and by the end of the semester, things are getting piled pretty deep. But when we keep up with our work in this class, I'm able to start to kind of back off on the workload in the final 3 or 4 weeks so that we can work on a final assignment and really devote our attention to that. So really the instructional stuff will start to wrap up here probably around week 11. Not to say that there won't be teaching and learning happening, but we'll spend a pretty good part of the last part of the semester just working on stuff and really implementing what we've learned throughout the semester. So, and that's a credit to you guys for being really, really diligent with your work. Very seldom have I had to track stuff down. So I really, really appreciate that. We're at about 13 and a half minutes, which is way too long for a video. I can tell you that. So anyway, I want to thank you very much again for all your work. If you have any questions about the instructions assignment, let me know. The only thing that I ask that you really think about is that your instructions are something that somebody could test safely. Okay? All right, take care.